Bruins Beat is brought to you by Prize Picks.
And welcome into the Bruins Beat, presented by Prize Picks. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $50 back when you play just $5. I'm Evan Marinofsky. That is Chris Peters. Chris, what is up?
Evan, well, everything is up. It's draft season. It's the busiest time of year for me, so I'm just trying to keep my head above water at this point and and get going. But thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
Of course, I'm glad you could fit some time in. I know you're out in Iowa, correct?
Yeah. So I've been living in Iowa for like 15 years now. So people are like, yeah, is that a hockey market? And I was like, well, I got like 3 USHL teams right nearby, and AHL, ECHL. I mean, it's been a pretty good hockey hotbed. Maybe not the most well known, but it's actually worked out well. My wife's from here originally, so yeah, we've been here for a while. It's been great.
Nice. And for people who don't know, the first time you and I spoke, this was a couple of years ago now, with our New England Hockey Journal magazine, we have a prospect watch page, and it's just a prospect, and it's sort of a scouting report breakdown. And it was the first one we'd ever done. We used to do something different, and we switched. And it was September of 2023, and it was Macklin Celebrini, this kid coming in to BU from Vancouver. Who is this guy? Tore up the USHL, and I said, well, Chris is an expert on this. I'll reach out to him. And I remember you really hyped him up. You were like, this kid's going to be real freaking good. And I remember thinking, all right, yeah, let's see. Like, college hockey's a big step. You know that. Like, we'll see what happens. You're right.
Yeah.
You were right on the money with Macklin Celebrini. My God, that kid could freaking play, and now he's tearing it up in the show.
Yeah, I almost feel like we underhyped him too much.
We probably did.
Obviously he came right in on the heels of Connor Bedard, and everyone's like, how could it possibly be like that? And then really, I think if you look between the two players, if you were to ask a lot of people which of those two players you would prefer to have long term, I think a lot of people would tell you Macklin Celebrini. Yeah,
and we talk about this. Conor Ryan and I talk about this quite a bit. Now, Conor's a BU guy, so a little bias. But I absolutely think so. I mean, you see the well-roundedness of the player, definite center, long-term, all those different things. But we're here talking draft. Haven't talked draft for the Bruins in a long time, or at least in a long bunch of years, where the draft has mattered around here. Bruins picking 7th, and we've riffed on this show about who they should pick. Different guys, and it's mainly us, I'll be honest, Chris, reading your work, others' work, watching videos, things like that, and trying to deduce, because I'm not watching these players all year, and you are. And so I wanted to kind of pick your brain on different prospects and who you think they might pick and different things like that. And I want to go over your initial mock draft you had after the lottery. To start, though, I'm curious, because this is something that gets asked every year. Do you draft for need, or do you draft best available? And I'm curious, like at number 7, do you see the Bruins? Do you believe in the top 10 you should be drafting for need, or should you always go best player available, or is it somewhere in the middle?
Well, I think it's an interesting dynamic, because I think that in hockey, it's, best player available according to who, right? Like, is it according to the public list? Is it according to central scouting? The thing is that best player available, the way that it works out, and the reason that we say it so much, is that by and large, NHL teams are going to pick from their list in order, which is to say, player X is number 7 on our list. Players 1 through 6 are already gone, so we're taking player number 7. And I think in a lot of cases, that's what NHL teams do. I do think that you allow need to help you build your list. I think that you say, well, hey, we could really use this in our system. So that's the thing, is like, it's kind of, in hockey, it's kind of different. It's not really like, I think in football, you draft for need, full stop. In football, you draft for, we don't have a wide receiver, so we're going to draft a wide receiver, a guy that we think is going to be our number 1. In hockey, because the vast majority of players aren't immediately available, you are drafting for need specifically, especially with your first pick, is typically not the best path forward. So it's a hard way to answer. It's a hard thing to answer, but I think in by and large, teams are going to say best player available to them, but they've also built their list based on fit. So that's the other thing. It's not just about where does this player fit in our system? And if you have, too many left shot centers, you might say, okay, well, we could maybe de-emphasize that a little bit in our list building. But yeah, it's never quite as black and white as you would hope in that situation would be. And I think it's why, fans will kind of get sucked into the public list. So when they see a player go way off the board relative to those, they freak out. And then sometimes the team ends up being right. It seems like a lot of times they don't. But that's just kind of the way that it goes.
And part of that's because you don't these guys aren't coming in a lot of times for 2 or 3 years. So it's like the best then it's projecting. And I think one thing that maybe the public doesn't do as much of is projecting. And sometimes they do, but a lot of it's sort of in the here and now, and you're not getting that player then. And then overall on this draft, it seems to me, as not a draft expert, that there isn't a generational player at the top, but there are a lot of guys in the top 10, top 15 who should be guys that make an impact at the NHL level consistently. And there seem to be a lot of centers, which for the Bruins probably bodes well. Am I right in that assessment?
Yeah, it's definitely a center forward heavy draft. I think that, in most cases, when you look at the top 10, you're going to see mostly centers and defensemen go, unless it's a truly exceptional wing. I think the thing is, part of the reason is that you draft guys to be centers, but that doesn't always mean that they will be centers. And it's easier to move a center to a wing than it is to move a wing to a center. But yeah, I mean, in this year's draft in particular, really, you've got Matthew Schaefer as the #1 defenseman, and then it's a whole bunch of centers after him outside of Porter Martone, who's a wing. So that's kind of where we see a lot of that. So it is a good year to be picking in the top 10. It's a good year to be needing, wanting to pick a center. I think that there could be some options for Boston among the defensemen that, in their range makes sense. But I mean, there's a lot of different things that depending on how they built their list, odds are there's going to be one of the centers that they really like at that range.
So I want to talk about your mock draft that came out, because I remember reading it right after the lottery. And before I even got to the Bruins, I was struck by your first overall pick. So you have Hagens going to the Islanders at 1. And it's in the minority a little bit, but it's interesting because preseason, Hagens looked like the guy. Hagens looked like going to be the #1 pick. What do you think the Islanders actually do that, or do you think they more should do that? And are you convinced that Schaefer is a #1 guy? Or are you not convinced that Schaefer is a #1 guy?
I mean, I would say that the general consensus is that Schaefer is #1. I think part of making that list, which came out literally an hour after the draft was there, I think
you were ready to go. Ready to go.
Yeah, every single the curveball of all curveballs was the Islanders getting the #1 pick. And that's the interesting thing about James Hagens, is that he could go within the top 3. He could go outside of the top 8. You just don't know based on teams. There's a wide range of opinions on him. The reason that I did that one is that mainly there's a couple of reasons. The Islanders still don't have a general manager, so it's kind of difficult to predict what that philosophy is going to be about the draft. The second thing is that there could be immense business pressure to draft a James Hagens who grew up on Long Island, who was a diehard Islanders fan who would do anything to be on that team. And I think a lot of Islanders fans initially were thinking, well, especially with where they were going to pick, well, we're never going to get James Hagens, but that's all right. And now all of a sudden you're in a range where you could potentially make this pick. And is he that talent? I think it's unlikely that would happen. But we still don't know who the Islanders have as a general manager, how much the influence of ownership would play a role, how much of it's beyond, when we talk about best player available versus need. I mean, the biggest conversation that teams have is fit, and fit for Islanders need everything. There's not a single position that they're strong in their prospect system, and probably not even at the NHL level. They have Noah Dobson. They have some guys that are long-term pieces for their blue line. That's great. But, Matthew Schaefer, adding that guy to the mix would probably be better. But I do think that there is at least the discussion to be had about the local kid who I don't think is very far away from the rest. And this is another reminder that mock drafts are not rankings. So it's not, if Matthew Schaefer is going to be number one on my list that comes out soon, but that doesn't necessarily mean there are a lot of decisions that go into a draft pick. So my post lottery mock draft is always the spiciest that I'll put out, and then I'll start kind of going.
That's why I like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it gets a little conversation going, and then what struck me was how Islanders fans really quickly started forming camps into the James Hagens camp, and then everybody else. Whereas, the only prospect most of those people knew about for months on end was James Hagens because he was the local boy done good. So there's a lot of it's going to be interesting to see the decision that ultimately gets made. I also think there's a really strong possibility that the Islanders could trade back with one of the teams that desperately wants Schaefer or Misa. And then that way, you get an additional asset or two out of it and could get the local kids. So there's a lot of different dynamics to that.
I would think that like the Sharks need a top D. I think that's very clear. Like I could see the Sharks jumping up. And I know even like when the Bruins fell to 7, my initial reaction was like, my opinion was you need one of Friedel, Hagens, or Desnoyers. And if you could, you're not trading up to 1, but if you can get into the 3-4 range, which you really couldn't in the lottery anyway, but if you can get into that area, you probably have a good chance at them. So I could see a team jumping up into 1, but I don't think it's the Bruins. I don't think the Bruins.
I would be surprised if it was. And I think it's really hard. And then I think like, if you're like the Sharks, you're like, you almost call their bluff at that point and say, all right, if you're not going to take Schaefer, then we'll roll the dice and see, if he's there when we want him. So I mean, it's never easy to trade in the draft either. So that's another facet. So lots to figure out yet, but but I mean, I think the thing is like wherever you're picking within that top 10, the consensus is very wide in terms of where there is, it's not very specific in that, I don't think that there's a set top 5 or top 6 or 7 or whatever. I think there's, still the great chance that somebody you really value is going to be there when you're picking.
Let's talk Bruins for a while. So we'll get to who you have them taking at 7. We'll get to that in a second. But I'm curious, like, one thing Bruins fans have kind of asked me and Bruins people have been talking about is like, is there any way someone could fall out of potentially that top 6 ranking to them at 7? Feels like to me, Jake O'Brien, Roger McQueen, Brady Martin seem like the guys around number 7 who will likely be there. Guys like Friedel, Hagens, Desnoyers, even Martone, probably gone before them. Misa, Schaefer, no question. Is there any way, or do you see any path in which one of those guys I just mentioned somehow falls in past the top 6?
I think it's absolutely possible. I think that, you look at this and there's not a lot of consensus. Once you say, okay, well, Schaefer, by most accounts, number 1, Misa, by some accounts, number 1, others 2. Some teams don't love him as much as some of the other players, but he probably doesn't slip any further than 5. And then, you look at some of the others, and I think, Martone has questions about skating. You've got and more compete level things. O'Brien has this flash and dash. I think there's some kind of view, maybe, how much of his production was, really that impressive. And then others like Hagens, Hagens had a point per game in college hockey, which normally is a great thing. It's better than like Brady Tkachuk did in his freshman year. It's better than Matty Beniers, so there are players where, he just didn't rise to the level of Fantilli and Celebrini and Eichel, who were, the Hobey Baker winners as freshmen, which I don't know is necessarily the fairest comparison to make anyway. So I think there's a chance that any one of those guys you mentioned, Evan, is available. Could it be Martone? Could it be Desnoyers? Could it be Hagens? Could it be, I think there's this distinct possibility. Like if Hagens doesn't go early, and if, say, the Islanders aren't in there, I think there's a chance he slips out of the top 5. And then all of a sudden you're like, maybe he gets to 7. And that would be a great value play. Like, I think, to me, he's the, third at worst, fourth best player in this draft. But that's not a widely held opinion. He's all over the map in terms of where teams see him because of, his size and just the fact that he didn't have as dominant a freshman season as most top prospects, guys that you're considering as a top 3 pick would have had.
Well, there are people who think he could be a wing. There are people who think he's undersized, like, defensive game, all these different things. And I agree with you on the point about college. Like, he's someone, it was the worst case scenario in that he followed Will Smith and Ryan Leonard's freshman year and Macklin Celebrini, and people kind of compare those guys and think, oh, he's got to come in. And I always think, like, when Hagens was when Hagens was going through his college hockey recruiting process about like a year and a half ago, the London Knights were hot on him and like really wanted him. And I always think, like, if he just went to London and lit it up, he's probably the consensus number 1 guy, I would think, right?
Well, I mean, if he would have outproduced Misa, but Misa would have had a 3-year head start on, a 2-year head start on him in experience and different things. And Misa had one of the best, most productive draft seasons of recent memory in the OHL. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's a real possibility of him having a more dominant season at the OHL level. But I think that some of the interesting thing is that when you talk to people, it's not just about like how Hagens played this year, was just the fact that in a lot of the biggest games that BU or BC played this season, he didn't have much of a offensive impact in those games. And that also was true at the under-18 World Championship gold medal game a year ago. And then at the World Juniors, he kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit, but he did score in the gold medal game. So there's a lot of different things. It's just that consistency. And I think that's something that we've seen across the board with a lot of these players, is that not many of them have had tremendously consistent seasons. I think that's why you have Misa so high, is that he was consistently productive. You kind of knew what you were going to get from him on a game-by-game basis. But you couldn't say the same about Porter Martone. You cannot say the same about Anton Frundell. You couldn't say the same about James Hagens. And so, those are the things that kind of hang in the balance of when you're making these decisions. And so I think there's a lot of intrigue left in terms of how this is all going to shake out. But I do think that, Hagens in the end will not be docked for playing college hockey and it being a tougher level. But I do think there's always that what if he did go to London and he had 140 points, which there's no guarantee that he would have, but on a team that good, certainly would have been possible, because that team was way better than the team that Misa was playing on in Saginaw. So a lot of what ifs there, but I think ultimately, he got a chance to play alongside Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, and he had a chance to learn from some highly offensive players. I really think that James Hagens is going to return to BC and could be a 50-point college player as soon as next season, which would be a significant uptick. But I really do believe he's going to be one of the best players in the country next year.
I completely agree. And that's why I think it'd be smart. It's the right thing to go back to BC, which it looks like that's probably what he's going to end up doing. I'm wondering how many of these guys have a legitimate shot to stick in the NHL. That's my thing. Yeah. So to go and make it out of camp, I just don't think there are many this year that'll be the case. Is there anyone in the top 10 you think that could step right in?
No, not really. I mean, could I think Misa could hold his own. I think Schaefer could hold his own. I just don't think that they're going to be. I don't think they're going to leave no doubt that they should be in the NHL. I think there will be doubts, and I think that those guys, it probably would make sense for them to, especially with Schaefer coming off of an injury, making a decision about where ultimately are you going to play. Does it make sense for some of these guys to do college for a year? There have been rumors about Martone and Misa and others about, will they play college hockey? The thing is that there's more options than there's ever been before. So I think that there will be a lot of discussions around those players and ultimately where they end up. But I think based on what I've seen this year, there's not one guy that I say he's absolutely NHL ready.
That makes sense. I want to talk who you think the Bruins pick at 7, who they should pick at 7. But first, our friends over at Prize Picks cash in on the basketball or hockey playoffs with Prize Picks. Don't miss your last chance to add your favorite players from the court or the ice to your Prize Picks lineup. Whether it's points, rebounds, assists, goals, saves, shots on goal, Pick more or less for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash today. Turn your playoff hot takes into tickets to basketball's championship series, starting with the play-in round. Every lineup you make on Prize Picks will enter you in the takes to ticket sweepstakes, which could get you and a +1 VIP a trip to the ship. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. No Boston teams in the hockey playoffs, no Boston teams in the basketball playoffs. So if you want to make it a little spicy, make these games a little bit more fun and interesting if they aren't already, which they are, but you want to make it a little more fun, sit on the edge of your seat, make sure to go to our friends over at Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So you have the one prospect at number 7 that's like, I think most Bruins fans look at, and from what they read and what they hear and what they see, and go, oh, really? You have Roger McQueen at 7. And at first, I remember when I saw your mock draft, I said, that's interesting. And a lot of other mock drafts had Jake OBrien. But The Athletic came out with a mock draft on Tuesday. So we're recording this Wednesday, May 21st. So the day before yesterday, excuse me. And The Athletic has Roger McQueen going 7 to the Bruins. Why do you think that makes sense? And what makes you not nervous, I guess, about the back injury?
Oh, I'm very nervous about the back injury. I mean, I'm also not, I think the thing is I'm not
being skeptical of what you're saying. I'm very curious on Roger McQueen.
Yeah, there was a big caveat in that pick, in that capsule that I wrote, which is that if there is significant assurances about the injury coming out of the combine, and more than whatever Caden Lindstrom proved last year, because he ended up missing pretty much this entire season. He just returned to the WHL finals and will play in the Memorial Cup. But that's the thing, is like, there's the caveat is that you would need to have so many assurances. And I think that there's a chance that Roger McQueen slips out, but this is a guy that people believe, based on a small body of work, had he been healthy for most of this season, he would have pushed to being the number 1 prospect in this draft. He's 6'5". He is a center. He is smart. He's a good skater for his size. I still think there are times where I have some concerns about his overall skating ability, but he has tremendous hockey sense, super, really solid touch around the net, power, strength, all the things. And, obviously the Bruins drafted Dean Letourneau last year, big forward, but, so far limited return because we haven't seen. I still think that he'll continue to develop. He's always been a long-term project. That's similar to what you would have with McQueen, which doesn't make you feel super great if you're a fan. But if you believe that his top end and his ceiling is that of a potential number 1 center, a guy that is going to give you two-way minutes, you can play matchups, who can score goals, then that's a player. If you get that player at 7, you're doing cartwheels in the street. Because it's so hard to find a number 1 center in general. There's only 32 of them in the league, so there's there's 32 guys in the world, that are number 1 centers in the NHL. And
that's a great way to put it. I've never thought of it like that.
I mean, like that's like, and I think sometimes when, especially like what we do in the prospect space, one of the biggest things that we do, and it's garbage day here, so if you guys hear my dog, I'm really sorry about that. It's just going bananas right now.
Okay.
But if you think about it, the thresholds that these players have to meet to play in the roles that people talk about them being drafted in is so incredibly high. I can tell you a player is a number 1 center upside, which to me is a significant, I am saying this player, I believe, is really one of the top players, will be one of the top players in the league. Not every number 1 center is a superstar, but they are a guy that plays significant minutes and is an impactful player for their teams. If I'm going to put that tag on somebody, I'm going to have to really think about it. So the thing about Roger McQueen is it's all a projection because we missed so much of this year, and it's all if he hits. But like, you talk to scouts, you talk to people, kind of around the game that say he's such a rare commodity. If he hits, you have a chance to hit a home run, but you are absolutely gambling because the only time it's bad to be big in the NHL is if you have back problems. And that's basically the side, like players that carry that height, extra weight, all those different things, they can be prone to longer recovery timelines, longer development timelines. And then if you have an injury on top of that, it gives you some pause. So what I'll say is, like I said, huge caveat. He makes sense for kind of the direction the Bruins are going, but I think that if there's any doubt, you skip right past them and you go on to a Jake O'Brien, to whoever that next best player is available. But I do think that the Roger McQueen factor of this draft is going to be absolutely fascinating. Wide array of opinions on him. Definitely some teams that will stay, won't even list him because of concerns about the back thing. But everyone believes that there's a really good player in there if he's able to reach that upside.
It's funny because I worry with the Letourneau pick. No, I don't worry about it. I respect them taking the swing for the fences. Like, I watched him a lot when he was at St. Andrews because he was playing New England prep teams.
Yeah.
And 100% long-term project. I've said all year, like, he should have been in the USHL this year. Don't base his, what he's going to be off of his first year at BC when he shouldn't have been there in the first place. But it is a long-term project, and you are swinging for the fences. And for a franchise that badly needs a number one center, do you do it again? And I completely understand what you're saying with McQueen of like, if the back holds up and if he can reach his potential, by God, like that's a number one center. That's a guy who's going to be dominant. You get worried though when you have when those are your top two prospects at center. Like that's where I do wonder with McQueen, like, are they willing to take another huge chance this year? Because if that, if that doesn't work out, that front office likely would be gone within 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Would they?
Yeah, you fit right in on this podcast.
I mean, hey, we're just handing out contract extensions and everything. So, but like I think what you're talking about there, Evan, is important because the idea of like that is the kind of draft pick, if you get it wrong, that does get you fired. Typically, you can't miss on a 7th overall. And if you knowingly take that risk in the way that Columbus knowingly took that risk with Caden Lindstrom last year at number 4, that would be interesting. And there's a lot of debate. We actually debated this on my podcast last week. Who would you rather have, Roger McQueen at full health or Caden Lindstrom at full health? And I said McQueen, and Cam Robinson said Lindstrom. And I think that they don't play the game similarly. I think Lindstrom has probably got the flashier offensive upside, but McQueen probably is the most well-rounded of the two players. And so, you've got a guy that could be there, but you absolutely have to get it right. And so, like I said, when my first one after the draft lottery is typically going to be the spiciest one that I do, where I'm taking a couple of swings. And the other thing that happens after mock drafts come out is that I hear from people and they're like, hear from people that would know, you're not even close on that one. And
that's always fun, isn't it?
That does happen sometimes. Like, it doesn't happen all the time, but I was intrigued, and obviously the one that got the most attention was Hagens at 1. But I think there was also some conversation about really where is McQueen going to go. And as you start talking to teams, I think it's less and less likely that he goes inside the top 10, but he's a player that I think you still have to know about because of just this tantalizing upside that remains there.
I was going to say, so maybe like there's a potential that he's in the top, picked in the top 5, but probably not. I mean, I don't know why a team would.
I would say it's unlikely, but again, it's just like if a team has him as their number 4 prospect and 1, 2, and 3 are gone, then that's who they pick, so yeah, it's never an exact process.
And then, so someone else, like who else do you see who could potentially be around there? I mean, like I look at like Jake O'Brien, and we'll start with him. Like, what would the Bruins be getting in a guy like Jake O'Brien?
Well, I think the excitement of a Jake O'Brien comes in that he has pretty decent size. He still needs to get thicker and fill out a bit more, but he's a 6'2" center, right shot. Makes a lot of plays. I mean, just makes a lot of plays all over the ice. High end skill, really good vision. Hockey sense is solid. Skating is solid. He's probably one of the flashier options in terms of what will be available at 7. He had an assist per game, averaged an assist per game this year, but he did play with one of an OHL player that had 70 goals this season. He also had over 30 goals this year, so he's got really good touch. His postseason was he had a point per game, but I mean, like, there was a lot of kind of I don't know. I think there were some scouts that wanted more from him at that stage of the season. Brantford ends up getting bounced, and then he didn't go to the under-18 Worlds, which I think could have potentially helped his cause, helping Canada win a gold medal there. To get, but this is a guy that I think could go within the top 5 as well. Like that's the range that we're talking about, is these guys in this cluster of Martone, Hagens, Desnoyers, O'Brien, maybe to a lesser extent McQueen. Those are the types of players that could go earlier than we expect, could go a little bit later. Like, I just don't think that there's really a good read on those guys. But O'Brien, to me, unless James Hagens is there, is probably the most dynamic of the group of what would be remaining.
Am I wrong to say he would almost be like a safe pick, if that exists? Not a safe pick, but like, you kind of know what you're getting, or am I off on that?
I don't know. I don't feel like there are very many safe picks in this draft period. And
compared to McQueen.
There's never a truly safe one. But like, there's not, like, I think like even Schaefer has a boatload of risk. We're judging him off of a super small sample. Misa, breakout season this year, but last year was kind of an extra guy on a championship team where he wasn't able to assert himself as much. So, there's risk in every single one of these guys, and O'Brien is the same way. Like, what if he never does tack on extra weight? What happens if he doesn't get stronger? That's usually not the case, because these guys are still obviously physically developing. But I also think you have to take your time and be really cautious about what you want out of a player, and make sure that you're drafting a player that has those assets and those elements.
If you're GM of the Bruins, if Don Sweeney didn't get the extension and they said, we're going to hire Chris Peters as the GM, between O'Brien and, like, if Porter Martone is still there, this is one debate that's come up. Do you take the center, or do you take the powerful wing who probably could have been picked in the top 5 or 6, but somehow wasn't? Would you go? I know you go best available, and it's all about, your sort of own rankings, but in your own mind, would you go Martone over O'Brien, or if you're the Bruins, or would you stick with O'Brien?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really finalized it on my own list. They're both close together, those two players right now. So, I think my lean would be towards Martone. I think, you've got the size element. He lacks consistency too. And sometimes you need a little bit more compete out of him. But I think if you're looking at those two players, typically, like, if you think it's close, usually the tie goes to the center. You're going to say, okay, well, we'll take the player with a little bit of positional value there. But I do think that, to me, Martone is just a bit more of everything, and he's got the size, he's got some physicality when he wants to. He has touch around the puck. I just think that having a power winger of that caliber might be a bit more overall effective of O'Brien. But I would also say, Evan, that it's super close. I don't think there's a lot separating those two players. And I think, again, like, that is a thing when they get down to the list and you've got a C and a D or a C and a wing on your list, and you're just trying to, like, you have them in a different order, and you're like, I don't know, we didn't expect them to necessarily be here, and he's here. Should we take him? Those are the conversations that get had, like, right there in the war room, or, previously at the table. So, so hopefully it, we won't get as much insight into that decision process now the teams are not coming to the draft.
With Martone, it feels like every mock draft I see a different placement of him. Some people have him in the top 3. Some people have him at 5. Some people have him at 8, 7, wherever it is. Do you like what you see from him? It feels like people kind of have varying opinions.
I like him when he's at his best. And when he's at his best, I think he's one of the best players in this draft. The problem is that we don't always get that, and I'd say that there is a lot of, he can be a frustrating player to watch. I think there are times where he's a little passive and he needs to be more in it and on it. I think that there are times where the compete wanes and he could probably use his body a bit better to win more pucks. So that's probably the downside. And I think a lot of teams are examining that very closely. I have a feeling Porter is going to get absolutely grilled at the combine, depending on when he gets back. But he's also now at the World Championships with Team Canada, having a chance to spend time around Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon, all these things. It's like, how can that not be a huge benefit for a player to see that at a young age and see how they operate? So, I just think that Martone has tremendous upside, but he's also one of those players where it feels like, is he going to get there, and does he have the drive and all those other things? I think he does. I mean, but it's hard to know from the outside. And so I do think that teams want to make sure with him, and he's going to have a very long combine week once he gets to Buffalo.
One guy that has risen a lot, especially after U18 Worlds, was Brady Martin. And it feels like he went from someone who some looked at as like, a 15th overall guy to now he's being talked about. I think it was The Athletic had a mock draft where he was like 6th. He's been talked about somewhere in the top 10. And I mean, the description sounds like a Bruin when you look at what he is and you watch his highlights. Is that a smart pick at 7? Or is his offensive ceiling a little bit too limited to take him that high?
Yeah, I mean, it would be high for me. I just think, like, say in this scenario, there's strong likelihood, that one of Hagens or OBrien could be there. I think Brady Martin is an exceptional player in a lot of different ways, and primarily in that he is pound for pound probably the strongest player in this draft. He is the hardest body checker in the draft. He is nasty, but he's just got this like incredible work ethic to him on the ice. I think the players kind of gravitate towards his play, and he brings energy. I think there's a lot of value for that player. I think Brady Martin is the kind of player that can help you win hockey games, and I think that he can do a lot of really good things for your team. And he had a really strong season. 72 points in the OHL. It's not like amazing, not earth-shattering, but 72 points in 57 games, and then 11 at the World Under-18s. And I think the fact is that the game, while it has, there's less fighting and things like that, it's still a very physical game. And to have players like him that really disrupt things for the other team is a net positive. So do I think it's reasonable for him to go 7th? I would say yes. Would I take him over some of those more tried and true offensive performers? I would say no, because I think that if Brady Martin doesn't hit, he's probably way down your lineup. He's still probably an NHL player, but he's not. But you don't draft just an NHL player at 7. You try not to, at least. So you've got to try to go a little bit more. And I think that where the Bruins are at, they have so many needs within their system, and they have a need to get more skilled and more dynamic. And I think that while Martin helps you in some of those assets or facets, I think that there will be some real opportunity for you to add a player that is just a bit more dynamic. And you say, okay, well, how long is Pasternak going to be here? How soon can we get a player that is up to his level to distribute pucks and things like that? And there probably aren't a lot in this draft. And I would say that Brady Martin is another one where I wouldn't necessarily say he's one of those guys.
And if there's anything this Bruins team does not need, it's another middle 6 center. God knows They have more than enough middle 6 centers. Caleb Desnoyers, I'm not going to ask you about every single prospect, so you don't have to worry about that. But Desnoyers is someone whose stock is wicked high after the playoffs in the Q. Moncton wins the whole thing. He's dominant. He's someone that I think a lot of Bruins fans targeted as like, all right, if the Bruins get the 5th pick or the 6th, that seems reasonable. Is there a chance? I know we've talked a little bit about guys falling, but do you see like a chance that he falls to 7? And if so, is he a guy that you would jump all over?
Yeah, I would have a hard time seeing him fall to 7. Mm-hmm. I think that he is too versatile and too, there's too many things to like about his game that I don't think teams will pass, but you never really know. I mean, it just kind of depends on how the first pick shakes out. And how that dictates the rest of the way that things go. But for me, I think that that's a player where he does so many things well. Like, I do think that he's a great fit for the Bruins, but he's a great fit for the Blackhawks. He's a great fit for the Flyers, like all these different teams that are, because who wouldn't want a versatile guy? I think his upside is number 2 center. I think that's probably, like, I don't see a top line center. I don't see a top power play guy here. I see a guy that is probably, yes, he probably will be a middle 6, but he'd be the best one of that group, and so, number 2 centers are such a valuable commodity in the NHL. They're very hard to find because, I think that it's just harder for players to develop that versatile skill set. Desnoyers plays at both sides of the game, both sides of the puck. He's all over it offensively. He's just the QMJHL playoffs MVP. He's hard-nosed. He's got work ethic. Is there a chance he'll be there? Yes. I just don't think it's likely.
Especially after that playoff run. That felt like it just, put the nail in the coffin that he was not going to end up being there at 7. I know you mentioned number 1 center upside, and you talked about it with McQueen. You think OBrien, like one of OBrien, or not one of OBrien, do you think OBrien could be a potential number 1 center someday?
I mean, I don't, it's hard to say. Like, I don't think so. Like I said, the threshold is so high. I'm not even 100% convinced Michael Misa is going to be a number 1 center. I think he has number 1 center upside, but I'm not, like, there are teams that are talking about him as a wing as well. So like, there are all these different things. So I think it's really hard to project that. I think it's, at this stage, does he have like the foundation of skills to potentially do that? Yes. But that usually it takes a lot longer. So we could say number 1 center upside, but he's not, he hasn't risen to that level for me. Like I said earlier in the show, is that it's got to be a pretty high threshold to get that number 1, like, top line player tag. And I'm having a hard time seeing that for really, the vast majority of players in this class, even though we know, because of the law of averages and everything else and history, that there are going to be players from this draft that are going to be substantial star players. That are going to be guys that make a significant impact in the NHL. But I think it's at this stage, there's a lot of uncertainty.
Is there anyone, before you head out, is there anyone that we haven't touched on that you could see the Bruins potentially going for at 7, like an Eklund, or do you think there's any chance they go for a D, like Mertka or Jackson Smith?
I think there is a chance that because of where they're picking, one of the best remaining defensemen will be available. Reddy Mertka, 6'6", skilled, good mobile, but doesn't have that same competitive motor that you would need to get the most out of a 6'6" defenseman. Yet he still is this kind of rare commodity at his size and his skill ability, where you'd have to at least consider that. You brought up Victor Eklund as well. I think that Eklund is a really exceptional talent. I think 7 is a very fair range for him to potentially go without me really batting an eye. If he were to go, say, before like a Hagens or some of those players, then I might be a bit more surprised. But still, Eklund actually outproduced Frundell. He did play more games at Djurgården this year. But the fact is that 2 of the best players in Sweden for the draft. Excuse me, I was trying to hold that one in.
Bless you.
Don't
worry, I get hit with allergies this time of year.
Yeah,
too,
it is allergy season.
Trying to try.
Yeah, but for Eklund to be one of the 2 best players on Djurgården and in the Allsvenskan as a draft eligible is pretty impressive. So, that's another player where I think that maybe he's getting overshadowed a bit because of some of the guys that we're talking about, and because he's primarily a wing. That'll kind of be discussed further, but that is absolutely a player that I think it makes sense. He's high compete level, really good skater, high end puck skills and vision. There is every reason to believe that he should probably be firmly in the top 10, even though he may not be in the public eye.
Well, Chris, this has been enlightening. I feel like my brain has been expanded. I'm a different person now that we've done this. What can people look forward to from you over at Flow?
Yeah, so FloHockey.tv, you're going to have a lot of stuff. We've got our podcast called Up, the Prospects Podcast, which has been a lot of fun with Cam Robinson, doing a ton more NHL draft stuff. We're going to have a Q&A episode tomorrow, which I'm really excited to put together. And we're so that's a big part of what we're doing, but also we'll have NHL draft rankings, more mock drafts. I'll have an updated mock draft as we get a little bit closer to the end of the NHL postseason. I'll be heading to the combine for complete coverage of that. And then, we have all of our streaming games, AHL, ECHL, the USHL just wrapped up, BCHL still going. So a lot of hockey still being played on FloHockey. So that'll keep us busy right through the end and right into the draft. So lots of content and obviously lots of live games as well.
Game never stops. Game never stops. Summer,
Never.
You got USA Hockey Select camps and everything. So it never slows down. But Chris, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And that's Bruins Beat. I'm Evan Marinofsky. Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.